Okay, so we're diving deep today into the Sikkimese language, and wow,
It's a fascinating one for sure.
it really is, yeah.
Yeah,
We've got some really interesting stuff here, showing how much a culture and its language are tied together. Like
absolutely.
it's more than just words, right? It's a whole worldview.
Yeah, you see it in everything from how they name their kids to how they show respect in their
Right,
words.
exactly. And we've got a bunch of cool material on all that. The naming conventions, the color terms, honorifics, even how spoken and written Sikkimese differ.
We're going to unpack all of that and hopefully get a real feel for what makes Sikkimese so unique.
Let's start with names.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has one, but in Sikkimese culture, it's not just a label. It's tied to your birth date, planetary influences, Buddhist traditions. It's a whole thing.
It really is. They typically go for a nice balanced sound, two syllables for first names.
Two syllables, huh? So like,
Exactly, like a Pima or Dorji, you can almost hear the rhythm in it.
I see. Yeah, and the day you're born is like a major factor, right?
Huge. It determines which planetary deity is associated with you, and that influences the name choices. There's a whole system to it.
Wow, so it's not just picking something that sounds nice. It's
Mhm.
connecting you to the cosmos.
Exactly. And to their spiritual beliefs, too. Buddhism plays a big role. It's all very interconnected.
It's amazing how much depth there is to a name. And then there's the whole gender thing, too.
Right. Some names are definitely gender specific, but what's interesting is they also have gender neutral names.
Oh, really? So like,
Yeah, like Yang Chen. It could be a man or a woman.
I've never thought about that. That's so cool. Okay, so what about last names? How does that work?
Well, last names are a bit more recent. They only really came into play with official documents and stuff.
Makes sense. So before that, everyone just went by their first name.
Pretty much. But the last names they do use are pretty revealing. They can tell you about someone's clan, their region, even their village.
Oh, like how?
So, for instance, you'll see clan names based on family lineages, or regional names like Denjongpa for men and Denjongpo for women, which instantly identifies them as Sikkimese.
That's so cool. It's like wearing your heritage on your sleeve.
And then you've got village-derived names, too, which gives you a sense of place.
Wow, names are a whole world into themselves.
Ah,
Okay, moving on. Let's talk color. This was a mind blower for me. They've only got 5 basic color terms.
I know, right? It sounds so limited to us,
Yeah.
but they make it work.
Okay, so red, yellow, white, black, and
A combined blue-green term.
blue, green. Seriously, just one word for both.
Yep, one word covers that whole spectrum. It makes you wonder if they see those colors differently than we do.
It really does. Like maybe that distinction isn't as important to them.
Exactly. They do have specific terms borrowed from classical Tibetan for more precise shades, but those are less common in everyday speech.
So how do they describe all the other colors, shades, all the nuances?
They get creative. They combine the basic terms or add suffixes to create new meanings.
So like what would they say, red, yellow for orange?
It could be something like that, or they
Uh-huh.
might say reddish for a lighter shade or dark red for a deeper one.
Wow, it's like building blocks. You start with the basics and then layer on from there. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a very different way of categorizing the visual world, but it works for them.
Okay, now let's get to the really interesting part, honorifics. This isn't just about being polite, it's built right into their grammar.
It is. It's fascinating. They've got different levels of politeness for nouns, pronouns, verbs, all depending on who you're talking to.
So you're constantly adjusting your speech based on the social context.
Exactly. You have to be aware of your relationship with the other person and their perceived status.
And is it like super complicated? Are there a million different levels?
It's not that bad. Most of the time, it's a two-tiered system. You've got your common forms and your honorific forms.
Okay, so like formal and informal.
Kinda. But even the common forms can have subtle nuances. But for the most part, it's 2 levels.
I see. So can you give me an example?
Sure, take the word for you. They actually have 3 different versions depending on how much respect you want to show.
Wow, 3 different U's. That's wild.
Yeah, you've got the casual one, the polite one, and then the super formal one.
Okay. And you got to know which one to use, or you could offend someone.
Exactly. It's all about navigating those social subtleties.
Now, I read that there are some villages that don't use honorifics at all. Is that right?
Yep, that's a really interesting exception.
So what, do they just come off as rude to everyone else?
Well, most Sikkimese speakers find it a bit blunt.
Yeah.
Like they're not observing the proper etiquette.
But I bet the people from those villages see it differently.
They do. They see the honorific forms as slow and overly wordy. Like, why use 8 syllables when you can say it in 3?
That's a good point. There's that whole perception of efficiency versus politeness.
It even affects how people judge your language skills.
Really?
Yeah, if you nail the honorifics, people think you're a more competent speaker.
Wow, so it's not just about being respectful. It's about showing off your linguistic prowess, too.
Exactly. Language can be a powerful tool for social signaling.
One last thing before we wrap up. Spoken versus written Sikkimese. Are they totally different beasts?
Not totally. They're pretty similar overall, but spoken language tends to be more streamlined.
Streamlined? Like how?
Well, they do a lot of phonological reduction, which is basically shortening or modifying sounds.
So it's faster to say.
Exactly. And they also do morphosyntactic reduction, which is a fancy way of saying they drop or simplify grammatical elements.
Okay, so can you give me an example?
Sure, in spoken Sikkimese, they might drop the genitive marker, which is that little word that shows possession. Like instead of saying the man's hat, they might just say man hat.
Oh, I see. And it still makes sense.
Exactly, it's just more concise. And they might also simplify case marking, which is how they indicate direction.
So they're basically taking shortcuts wherever they can.
Exactly. It's all about efficiency in spoken language.
So what about borrowing words? Do they borrow from other languages?
They do, both written and spoken. Sikkimese borrow, but in different ways.
Oh, how so?
Well written, Sikkimese tends to borrow from Tibetan, especially for standardization purposes,
Yeah.
to keep the written language consistent.
Makes sense. But what about people who can't read Tibetan?
That's the tricky part. It
Okay.
can make the written language inaccessible for some.
I see. So it creates a barrier.
Yeah. On the other hand, spoken Sikkimese borrows a lot from Nepali and English.
So they're picking up words from the languages they use in daily life.
Exactly. And that can lead to a lot of code switching where they mix languages within a single sentence.
So Sikkimese is constantly evolving, incorporating new influences.
It is. It's a living language, always adapting.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. It's amazing how much we can learn about a culture just by looking at its language.
Absolutely. It's a window into their values, their beliefs, their way of life.
So to recap, Sikkimese names are packed with meaning tied to their beliefs in the cosmos. Their color system is super efficient and might point to a different way of seeing the world.
And then there's the whole honorific system, which is key to social interaction. And finally, we saw how spoken and written Sikkimese are in this constant dance, influencing each other through streamlining and borrowing.
It really shows how dynamic language is and how it reflects the society it's a part of.
It does. I think a key takeaway here is that language isn't just about words. It's about understanding a culture.
It's about seeing the world through a different lens.
Exactly. And I think that's something for everyone to consider. How does the language you use every day shape your view of the world?
How does it reflect the culture and society you're a part of? It's much more than just words.
A lot to think about.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Sikkimese. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, a real treat.
Until next time.
Yeah, see you then.